So we're now starting our section number 3 for the day, accessibility of web content. And I'm inviting Valeria Kurmak, who is a specialist in digital accessibility, and she'll be talking about web content accessibility guidelines. So, I'm going to talk to you about digital accessibility. It's the 1000th time I'm talking about this, and I feel that you seem to be familiar with this as well already. So I think I'll go quickly through my main content and switch quicker to a dialogue, talking about your experience. Maybe I could be useful for you in this so that both our live and online audiences will be asking questions. I hope we'll have a good dialogue. So let's start. I think I will be turning around a lot because I cannot see the slides like this. So allow me to introduce myself. I have been working in this area for more than 5 years. I have completed a large study on people with disabilities. The website is currently down, but I hope they will restore it soon. And I think that's a useful thing because such large studies have never been conducted in Russia. It includes all kinds of disabilities. We're talking about physical environment, digital environment, and digital communication. We considered various needs of people with disabilities. Based on this study, I wrote my guidelines on adapting offices, on creating accessible digital environments, and communicating, because in Russia, this is the most pressing issue. Communication, when you do not understand who is in front of you, you have no experience communicating with them, you're afraid of aggravating them, there are lots of stereotypes around it, and so on. Last year, I launched a course on digital accessibility because I think the important thing here is to educate people. And if our designers and developers are educated enough, our digital environment will be more accessible. And I've also got a Telegram channel where I blog about my thoughts on digital development and other things that inspire me. Right, let's start. Scaling is my first point. We have reshuffled the slides a little bit, so there will be no GIFs and fancy animations. So what's important about scaling? People with disability, people who are partially sighted, have to have this text readable. That's why they need special font sizes. You have probably seen adapted websites with large scale fonts for people who are partially sighted, but many people require 4 or 6 times as large fonts. And adaptive layout is much more helpful here so that every usual website can be adapted for a mobile version. You are not doing something especially for people with disabilities, you're doing it universally and it will be working universally. Next, contrast and emphasis. Contrast is important not just for text, but also for various objects on the page, because objects, from the point of view of everyday user experience, help a user to focus quickly to find something that's important for them. When the text is gray on gray, this is just very hard to read, but also it's very hard to identify where, for example, buy a ticket button is in this example. You have to scan through the whole page to find it. That's why designers highlight these elements that they call to action with some bright color. So contrast is important not just for texts, but also for the whole UX, so that the user doesn't spend his time studying the whole page, but really quickly understands what they need. When we talk about contrast, it doesn't mean that everything should be acid green or neon pink. It could be gray on gray, but there must be a certain value to color contrasts, numerical value. We see here gray on dark, 2.8 is the contrast value. The other example has 5, and this is great. However, there is a new revision of the international standards due to be out very soon, and they are reviewing their guidelines on contrast. So it means that very soon we'll have a new numerical parameter for it. And that's good because it's developing and it has to happen. Next, not just color. When we talk about colors, there is one more interesting thing. There are people with color blindness. Some cannot see red, some green, some blue. And in the world, color blindness is mainly seen in men. 8% of all men are colorblind in this or that way. And for me, it's always interesting to know that people with color blindness are not legally disabled. So when we talk about digital environment, we should know that in Russia, there are about 8% of all people that are disabled, but then we also have 8% of all men that are not disabled legally, but they need inclusive design that is important for them. And what matters here is that important information is highlighted not just by color. I asked a friend of mine once, who is colorblind, to show me some interesting cases. And he said that he holds his money in a bank that presents him messages or notifications. Some of them are green, some of them are red. The serious ones are red. And so he got a notification about his credit being past due. But because he cannot tell green from red, he could not notice that it was urgent. So it's just color, but it can lead to serious consequences. Next, what's important is page structure. Here it's also more about UX and not design per se, but here the layout influences the UX for people who are partially sighted. Partially sighted people use screen reader accessibility applications that read everything aloud, everything that is presented as text. It reads top to bottom, left to right. How does it do it? For example, there is a button, shrine up can be seen here on the screen. The program reads it aloud as shrine up button. Next element here is an icon that has no text, but the partially sighted person has to receive some information here. It means that in the code for this button, we should have a remark back, for example. In the next icon, we see a card. So the partially sighted user should hear card button. Then it should be menu button. Next, we have an image. The partially sighted user can see what is shown here. The screen reader should pronounce it, should spell it out as it is written in the code. So in the code that you see on Alt F, there must be a remark, ice cream or popsicle in this case. Next, what's important here is that when a sighted user sees a page, they see headlines. We can separate headlines from the main text by text size, by bold font, and so on. It allows us to scan the page quickly without reading it whole and skip quickly to the part that we want to read, to subheadings, to one article out of many, and so on. In the same way, a partially sighted individual or a blind individual will be navigating. If headlines are marked in the code as headline level 1, headline level 2, and so on, the user can skip through them without reading the whole page, without having to read the whole page, skipping between level and so on and so forth, reaching everything quickly.
I have already spoken about alternative texts. What matters here is that there are platforms and services that are crowdsourced. Medium, for example. Medium cannot make all pictures accessible. because the pictures are uploaded by users. And when you upload a picture, they make a suggestion. Do you want to describe it? And thus, the content is made more accessible for blind people. The same for PowerPoint. When you upload a photo on PowerPoint presentation, you are suggested to give a caption, to give a title. Then a blind person will hear what picture decided to place on the page. Keyboard access. There are people who are paralyzed, who can't use the computer mouse, so they have to use the keyboard. What is important here? It will be perfect for the keyboard access to be functionable. And another thing, since a person manages the interface, it's important for them to understand where the focus is. So when they click on the next element, it has to be highlighted. It doesn't always happen. Let's move on. We have discussed the types of elements already and the interaction with them. Now I suggest we discuss the understanding of interfaces. The standard says make the interface user friendly so that people would not make mistakes. Sorry, I have to go back. Sorry, my mental model is somewhere beyond what we're doing today. So the screen reader reads the whole text that you have on the screen. So that means that the screen reader will read HTTPS, TT2 point service, so some rubbish actually, right? If I click there, what's going to happen? And for seeing people, this is also rubbish. Why do I need to see it? You can create hyperlinks in the text, then any user will understand. If I click on this hyperlink, this is what I'm going to see. So this is an important thing to bear in mind too. As for these bits and pieces, when we write messages on Telegram, for example, we can highlight a piece of text and add a link to it. We can do the same thing when we write emails. Again, not to copy paste the whole link, but to insert it into the text. So every one of us can do it, even though we are not designers. As for understandability, this is my favorite picture. I've shown it. Shown it a million of times. Why do I like it? Cool design is so understandable that people cannot make a mistake. So you see, there is a certain number of shrimps here. You will be unable to put more salt, more shrimps into it because these are perfect ingredients. This is a perfect instruction. Perfect design is the same. That means that any human being with any disability will cope with it, will understand what is needed. And now, what I have spoken about long before, people also have to have a chance to correct the mistakes they're making. I have recently had such a case. Guys forwarded me a system where I had to register, which I did, and then there was an error that my password does not fit the system. So it has to include other symbols. But it didn't say what symbols had to be included. When I asked the guys, they told me, well, you need to have a number, a capital letter, an additional symbol. So how can users basically guess what their password has to be like? And it's not about disabilities at all. It's just about good, okay design. Um, as we know the stroboscopes are dangerous for people with epilepsy, and the same for the lights that are quivering. And for example, the designers of the Olympic Games in London used stroboscopes. And when the Olympic Games was broadcasted on the TV with this stroboscopic kind of lighting, and a lot of people they had fits, they had seizures, they had to call ambulances. So such an image, because of its strobing, can cause epilepsy, and this is something to bear in mind too. We have discussed important things for visually impaired people, contrast and the ability to scale text. For the blind people, we need to provide alternative ways of gathering information. We've talked about people with motor disabilities, and we haven't talked about deaf and hard of hearing people yet. We need alternative text too. This is the format I love. We have recently discussed it with someone that people sometimes watch videos at double the speed just to go through 'em faster. And I love text because for me, I can look through the text even faster yet. And it's cool when we have interpretation into sign language. All the things that I've gone through are available in the guideline for digital accessibility, and it's open for public, for anyone willing to look through it, to read it. Actually, in Russia, this information is not that accessible, so it's really cool that we have it available. It's important for all Russian language community in the CIS countries and Belarus. I just wanted to say, if you're a designer, if you're a software engineer and you want to go deeper into this topic, I will be very happy to see you at our course. We're offering a course on that. These are my contacts. I'm always open to communication. I will be happy to answer your questions. So this is it. Valeria, thank you very much. Any questions from the audience? What do you think about abracadabra font? Here's my question. I'm testing the website I'm responsible for now. And I had a case I even forgot about. A student in the university came up to me and asked me to send him a link directly because he could not click on the link. He did not see it. Um, he was very shy, but he said that he didn't see colors. So for him, everything was gray. He didn't know where the link was because the link itself was bright green on bright blue. Now I understand that I have to use screen readers to check accessibility. So for colorblind people, is there any software that allows you to see what it is like for the um, colorblinded people? Yes, designers use now Figma, and it has a login titled Stock. You can open the page, any page, and see in this plugin what it looks like for different types of color blindness. It will show you the way it looks like. In my talk, sometimes I show this picture, a football team with green pants, red t-shirts, and the stock shows that, for example, their t-shirt and their pants are seen equally as yellow by people with a certain type of color blindness. And there is another thing which I recommend to everyone. It is great for empathy, and if you want to look like to see what it looks like for every people, there is Funkifine for Chrome. It enables you. I have a separate talk at the Raiffeisen conference where I was talking about that plugin. You can find this talk on YouTube. It's available. So you can use this plugin to see what the page looks like for visually impaired people, for blind people, what it looks like when the sun is bright. It's again not about disability, but this is an important thing too. People without disability sometimes find themselves in these situations when the contrast is not enough because of the sun rays, direct sun rays. And what touched me most is trembling, because when you enable the simulator of trembling hands, your mouse is moving all the time and you can't hit the button. This is a very working technology. You understand how difficult it is for people. Have I answered your question? Yes, thank you very much. Any other questions from the audience? We do have questions from YouTube. So here is a question from YouTube. Thank you very much for the talk. If the website is inaccessible from the very beginning, does it make sense to adapt it, or does it make sense to make a new one? It depends. In my experience, I had a case when we decided to make these guidelines on ReadyMark, went through the autonomous testing. We saw that we didn't have inscriptions for the buttons. We added texts, and then it turned out that ReadyMag, I told you about the structure of the page. It looks differently for a blind person, and we realized that we won't be able to redo ReadyMag. It's easier just to make it anew. We did it there. But in general, I think this is basically a scenario to avoid. You can always work with the website that you have. For example, I attended a Minsk conference with a blind guy. He said that he used Viber, but in a recent version, which has been released now, the button send is not inscribed. It just says button, and I don't know what I'm pressing actually. It turned out that there were people from Viber in the audience. They added the text to this button, and after a day, the app became accessible again. So sometimes all you need is basically 5 minutes, and this is it. Hopefully, we answered your question. Thank you. We have another question from YouTube too. Is the contrast of black and white enough? I think the question is caused by the new widgets which contrast yellow and red or yellow and black. Yes, I think black and white is enough. The only thing is that there is no designer who will agree with such a design because they want to express themselves. But in general, this is okay, really. I will show this slide again. The hues of black and white can be completely different, but the main thing is that the coefficient of contrast will be the same. The minimum contrast is 4.5 to 1. For bigger font, you can decrease it to 3 to 1. Do all designers know the guidelines for accessibility? Is there shared consensus about accessibility in the community of designers? Well, the answer to the first question, not all designers know it, and I would say that very few designers know about it now. And I think that for the fifth year, I repeat the same thing, and every time it causes surprise. There are a lot of designers who don't know about it yet. Yeah, and the next question is how to explain to designers the concept of accessibility. So, what designers need to know? They need to know three things: contrast, don't use red and green, or rather be very careful with them. Red, green, and yellow. Because for people who are colorblind, for example, Sberbank, Raiffeisenbank look completely the same. They just look the same. And I think this is a great thing too. Here is where your talent of a designer works. How can you transmit the idea of the bank? What identity, what brand fonts have to be for you to show that this is different? I would like to add something. What's maybe brief can we compile for designers for them to be able to work on that? In one of my most recent posts, and maybe in my last post on the Telegram channel, I posted a poster which is done in virtually the same manner. It says contrast, colors, what else? And then this poster can be rebranded for your company and you can hang it in your office. Thank you. And we have one more question about alternative text. Sometimes the description windows are limited in the signs you have to use. How to avoid that limitation? Are there audio describers among us? When I talk to blind people, I think the shorter the text, the better. I mean, imagine this is a huge mental load. When we run tests, for example, I work with designers, researchers, their mind explodes. All you see is a picture, but for the blind users, hear every word which is here on the page. The more text, the more they have to hear. This is terrible. And sometimes I help companies adapt their services. And when we discuss how to, for example, describe a button, then we have to make it as short as possible. Like, even if there are two words, they are trying to shorten it into one word. Because the shorter, the easier it will be to perceive the information. And today, I also made a report which I called mental models. And I realized why it is so hard for adults who lose vision, why it is so hard for them to learn to master the screen reader. Just imagine how much information you have to bear in mind, how you have to process it in your head. You have to remember this information and navigate the website. It is really difficult. So please keep it as short as possible.
Thank you. Have we got any more questions from the whole audience? Has anyone tried anything like that with their websites? No? Okay. Then I think it's good that we have done it quickly. We can take a rest or continue our agenda. Yes. Thank you so much, Valeria. We're not going to rest because we have one more speaker. It's Matt Thacker, who is a customer success manager at Userway, And UserWay is a company that has developed a widget in order to make websites more accessible for people with various experiences and needs. And he will tell us more about the company, about the widget, and I hope that we'll have more questions to him. So,
okay, great. So thank you very much for having me. It's very cool what you guys are doing here at the Garage Institute. I really like this sort of concept. So thank you for having us. I think that I'll go through a quick speech and then a demo, and then I can answer any questions that you guys will have at the end. So the theme for this is accessibility, obviously. And how can you make a website accessible without changing the code itself? So when you think about accessibility on a website, it's not just the code. It's not just a technical aspect. Accessibility touches every single business group within an organization. So every aspect of a website or a public-facing entity of an organization needs to be aware of accessibility, and it needs to be involved in the accessibility journey. So every business group, the previous presenter talked about design. So you have color contrast, you have the visual aesthetics of the site itself. These need to be compliant. So this can kind of run counter to branding things, especially if your brand has orange in it. Orange on orange is the hardest color combination to make accessible. So you need a design team that is aware of it and not just focused on the aesthetics of a site. And this is a very new idea because people are building sites to please the eye, not for accessibility. And on top of the design teams, you have content and marketing teams. So you have the alt text, you have the copy on the website itself. This is something most people don't think about. You need the copy of the website to be accessible. So you need to make sure that your readers are able to understand it and that it's very approachable. So if you have readers who have cognitive disabilities or mental disabilities, or they're slow learners, or they're non-native speakers of your target language, you need to make sure that you have some sort of option or shift that allows for them to be covered as well. Because this is a very important part of accessibility, is in the content of the website itself, even for sighted people. Because the current WCAG or WCAG standards tend to focus more on the blind. So many of the accessibility standards are focused on blind users, but people with mental and cognitive disabilities still have a lot of trouble with websites. So this is where your marketing and content teams really need to put in the work. And you also have HR and recruiting. So if your company is trying to be inclusive, then they need to be able to recruit blind people. They need to be able to recruit deaf people, people with motor dysfunctions. But if your website is not accessible, how are these HR teams able to recruit these people? And then if the company itself isn't internally accessible, then it's just an impossibility. And then obviously the most important are developers. So the developers are the ones that are building these sites, both front end and back end. They need to make sure that the code is accessible when it's built. But then after launch, what happens? Can you keep maintaining that code? It would take a lot of time. And this is an enterprise level. So this is an organization that has a lot of resources. They have multiple business silos that are able to address each individual aspect of the functionality of the organization. So if you have a medium business, your team is much smaller. So your tech team might only consist of 2 people. So these 2 devs, accessibility is probably not their focus. They're probably focused on product or internal developments. They might not even think about the website at all. So accessibility for them, they might only vaguely be aware of it, but not really understand it. And that's within a medium business that has some sort of resources. And then you look at the very small organizations. You look at, maybe a restaurant's website or some website that is run by someone who has absolutely no technical knowledge. They don't even know, what a header is. They don't even know how to interact with code or inspect elements on a page. They obviously cannot change the code itself. So what tools do they have to make their website accessible? You have just one person with no tech experience. What's their solution? You can't go in and you can't fix this code, especially if these people are buying sites from a platform or a provider. So this agency might tell you, yes, your website is compliant. Uh, but even if it is at launch, sites age, compliance standards change. So over time, this gold standard of accessibility will change as you've added new content, made updates to websites. Accessibility standards change. So if you don't know how to change the code, your website's only going to become less and less accessible. So what is the solution for enterprise, medium business, and small business? Like, what can you possibly do if you can't change the code itself? You have manual audits, and that's typically been the path for a lot of organizations, is they'll pay some outside organization or some consulting firm to audit their entire site and build a roadmap that tells them how they can better their organization. And this is a very good thing, but it typically takes months and months, and it costs tens of thousands of dollars. So this is a solution only available to enterprise level organizations, and it's very time consuming. It takes a lot of money, and it typically is focused very much on the tech-centric business stakeholders within an organization. So it's leaving out the marketing, it's leaving out the content, it's leaving out the design, and it's just focusing on the technical aspects of the site. So you're left with this report, and then what do you do? So even if you have a team of very, very talented developers, a very talented developer does not intuitively know what accessibility is. Accessibility is very complex. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a giant scale of disabilities you have to cover. So even if you're a very talented full stack developer, you might be useless when it comes to remediating for accessibility. So now I think that the best solution for remediating a website in terms of entire transformational changes are automated solutions. And those come typically in the form of a widget. So the advancements in AI and in overlays and in widgets means that today, every single person who owns a site has access to very powerful accessibility and remediation tools that just 2, 3, 4 years ago were absolutely impossible. It was just science fiction. But now the technology is so advanced and it's so smart that you can remediate a vast number of issues on site immediately. And this is really, really empowering for those sort of business groups that I discussed earlier. So you implement a widget onto your site, and these remediations happen automatically. And one of the most important parts of this being part of your accessibility journey is that this provides input from non-technical teams into your accessibility platform. So this allows your content teams to access this information. They don't have to go into the backend. They don't have to update alt text manually. They're able to do it through a widget or through automated processes. Image recognition software automatically applies alt text to images. And for a company that might have thousands and thousands of product images on a site, it is impossible to remediate them manually, or maybe not impossible, but difficult. And so this automation really helps, bringing in non-technical stakeholders into the enterprise level solution set. And for medium and small businesses, this allows them to have as much coverage as they need because they don't need as complex an accessibility solution as an enterprise does. So a widget on its own, properly managed, allows you to reach about 95% compliance. With the exception of rich media content and PDFs, the widget can remediate almost anything. There are still some code level changes, but 95% is massive, especially for these very small businesses who don't have the budget, they don't have the time, and they don't have the knowledge. So this is really opening up the internet for everyone. So we've talked about the widget, we've talked about like sort of the transformational aspect of it, but what specifically does it do? Well, the widget itself will cover a wide spectrum of disorders, and it usually allows for people with two sets of disabilities or different spectrum of disabilities to interact with your website. So you have the widget itself, which a sighted viewer would be able to interact with. So it's typically the little button on the screen, you pop it open, and you click buttons to change color contrast, you make text larger, you pause animations, you have dyslexia fonts, so many really powerful tools that are integrated directly into the user interface. And these are really beneficial for people with mild to moderate disabilities, or people who might not even consider themselves disabled. You know, my mom uses an iPhone with the largest text possible. But if I called her disabled, she would kill me. So she's not disabled, but she needs something like this. And this allows you to reach this target audience without any changes on the code level. So that's just the widget level itself. And then behind that, you have this really incredible AI that's automatically running hundreds of tests, correcting thousands of violations on page. So they're scanning the DOM layer and they're applying these changes live on site. So you can add ARIA labels to certain elements and change their role function on the fly as someone who's not technical. So it's not a change to the code, but it feels that way just because these mutations are applied on site load. But the code base itself remains unchanged. So people with needs for assistive technology, people who are using screen readers or eye trackers or braille readers, or have motor function impairment so they can't use a mouse or a trackpad, they need the site to be in this state when they arrive on it so that they can interact with it as needed. And that's really what the widget helps do through these DOM layer mutations. And another thing that's really, really beneficial is that if you have an organization that has maybe hundreds or thousands of websites, this is probably the only way that they could ever hope to remediate this. Because if you've got sort of a backlog of sites, you know, some organizations have thousands and thousands of sites, there's no way to manually remediate them. It's just an impossibility. So automation is really going to be the key to a lot of accessibility solutions in the future, both for small businesses, medium businesses, and large enterprise solutions. So while these solutions are running on your page, your internal teams can then focus on code solutions. You can then come in knowing that you're covered to about 95% and remediate at the code level. So that's sort of when the entire organization is aware of accessibility now. They're involved in the process. They're adding their input. So when that is addressed, then you can focus on the code. So I think that there has been a massive shift from it being a developer-centric sort of problem to an entire organizational transformation. And the widget really helps as that first point of contact with making that really giant step forward in remediation. And I honestly do think that the improvements in the growth in AI technology will be really stunning, especially in the next couple of years, just because in the last year itself, we've seen a lot of transformation in this area. So I could give a super quick overview of the widget itself, just so that you could see what one looks like running on a test site, or I can just do Q&A, whichever is preferable.
Matt, we think that it's interesting to learn more about how the widget works on a test site. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So here we have a test site. We built this site intentionally with remediation errors, just so that we're able to, one, test new features, and two, sort of give an inside demo. So here you have the widget itself, and this provides that dual functionality I spoke about earlier. So you have the user-initiated remediations here that allows end users to change elements on the page to create a better experience for that specific end user. So these changes only live within the page of that browser for that specific user. So invert colors, it's for people with color blindness or sensitivity to certain colors, or if they're unable to read elements on screen, this helps them with that. Larger text, again, for people with problems reading. Pause animations, this is for people who have vertigo or nausea when elements are moving on screen. Larger cursor, you can also switch this to a reading mask, just so that they can see. Oh my. It seems that the reading mask has covered the entire site. All right, I'll switch to another test site that's a little bit less aesthetically pleasing. Again, some of the interesting bugs that come up only when you do a demo. So again, you can see you have all of these various options that are allowed the end user to make an experience that's better for them. So here you see the reading mask that allows for people to specifically choose elements on screen that they, I think that this is. I'll do it on our own site. So I think that there is a bug with the reading mask. Okay, so again, you get to see those various elements on play, and this these remediations are for people with mild to moderate disabilities who want to change elements on screen. So for someone with more profound disabilities who are not even able to interact with this widget at all, so they can't see it, they can't open it, they need these remediations to be automatically applied to the site. So then here you would go into the manage option, you would log in, and then here you see the AI that's running internally. So you're able to see all of these checks that are being run constantly. So even as new elements are applied on page, as new things pop up, as user-triggered events happen, they're still remediated. And these dozens of checks are fixing thousands of issues, especially on sites that are built with no remediation at all applied. This can be a lifesaver. So again, you can have your content team come in and just go into these alt tags and approve them, all from the front end, all from a single point, and all without a technical knowledge. So you're able to change these AI-generated tags. So the AI has generated this description looking at it. So technically you are covered, it adds that, but it doesn't know why it's on your site. So that's why your marketing teams will come in and make these approvals, just because they want to add a business sense to that. Also, you can make an image decorative. So that means that it's not going to be read to someone who's using a screen reader. Just because for blind people, they derive very little value out of being read most images. See, the image here of this man in a chair, no value to a blind person. You can mark it as decorative. So this is really helpful to marketing teams. And then you have color contrast readers. You have headings that have been automatically restructured if necessary. And again, the heading levels are not changed on the code level. They're given ARIA tags. So they act as if it is an H1, but we don't force that change on the code level. Because if you force an H1 change, it could visually break the site. And it's very important that these widgets never change the experience for a sighted person. So a sighted person needs to feel no difference. You could only feel the difference when you inspect code on the page live. So again, you've got broken links, vague links. A vague link is a really big violation. So a button that just says, click here, learn more, next, that's a problem. A blind person needs to know context behind that button. So from here, you can add a description that says, click here to learn more about accessibility technology, instead of just learn more. Form labels, that's also a violation. So as a sighted person, we see email and then a blank, and you insert your email into that blank. But if a blind person lands on that link and they're not told what to do, they have no idea what they're supposed to do. So this allows you to attach an ARIA label to that so that you can describe to the blind person what they're supposed to do. And you can even mark these forms as required so that they cannot progress through the site without providing this information. It's just really helpful in keeping people from getting lost or not understanding what they're supposed to do. So this is helpful for both blind people and the cognitively disabled. So you'll see that there's tons and tons of elements that have automatically been remediated, color contrast, which can be reviewed by your design team, alt tags that can be reviewed by your marketing teams. Your careers page can be overviewed by your HR teams, and then your business stakeholders get bigger visibility into the entire accessibility process because it's right there on the site. Everyone can see it. It's not hidden in code. So they'll see, we applied the widget and then we got a 4% jump in sales. So what could have been the cause of that? So it might very well be that you're reaching a larger portion of your audience, because it's estimated that about 20% of the population has some form of disability, even if it's just eyeglasses or color blindness or some sort of mild cognitive disability. So these automated solutions are really powerful tools to help make sure that any website is accessible, regardless of the technical knowledge of the team or company that's owning that website. So it really helps to remove barriers. So I really do think that the future of better accessibility is going to be in automation. I guess now I can answer any questions that you guys might have.
Yeah, Matt, we do have some questions. The tech team will bring you back on the screen. Dear Matt, how much is the monthly subscription? And I also saw the information approved by 60 million of people with disabilities. How did you measure this number, or how did you conduct this research?
Well, the million websites comes from the fact that we are installed on over 1 million websites now. So that many sort of organizations trust us with their accessibility needs. And the 60 million users with disability is based on interactivity with the widget itself. So it's more of an estimate, but it's just due to interaction with the widget itself. And in terms of pricing, we base our pricing on page views. So if you have under 100,000 monthly page views, you're in the small business package, and that would be $490 for the year. And then it scales up two more to medium business and large business. So it depends on your monthly traffic, but it's very affordable.
Any other questions from the audience? I have a question. Matt, before that, in our conference, we talked about universal design and principles of universal design. And we also said that the principles of accessibility have to be built into the project when you're just starting from scratch. And what you suggest is using a widget to change contrast, for example. But before, at other sessions of our conference, we also discussed that if you follow, how should I put it? I mean, if you follow that ratio 4.5 to 1, then the contrast is enough, and you don't have to use widgets, or you don't need any other special features, accessibility features. So the same goes for fonts. We don't have to use really small fonts on the website, and we can basically follow the universal design principles, and then we don't need any additional widgets. The same goes for the font that can be more accessible for people with dyslexia. We discussed people who have dyslexia, and we found out that it's all very individual, but still we can find some universal kind of font that will suit the majority of people. We can analyze the spacing. So it seems like you can make your website accessible for many people from scratch. So the question is, do we need widgets at all? This is my question.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question. My theory was more on, is a code change necessary? But now, when you're talking about designing new sites, uh, designers, developers, copywriters, they're much more aware of these sort of changes. But a lot of the sites out there, they're using HTML, they're using CSS. So these are technologies that were built 25 years ago. So they were not constructed with blind users in mind. So it's really helpful that you do have these best practices when spinning up new websites. You want to make sure that your color contrast is good. You want to make sure that your design is accessible. You want to make sure that your fonts are legible. And our widget has a dyslexia specific font that UserWay built internally. Over 2 years of research, we created a specific dyslexia font. So launching that website in as high a standard as possible is excellent. It's great. It should be what people strive to do. But I think I mentioned this in my talk. Once you release that website, once it's launched, uh, then what? So your content teams are adding new content. Your devs are pushing updates to prod. A website is a living city. It's not managed by one person. So you've got hundreds of people managing thousands of moving parts. How do you make sure that all of those are accessible? You need to have some sort of solution that's joining them all together. Uh, Especially as a website ages, there's no way to guarantee that a website launched at compliance standards is still compliant 3 years later. Laws change, technology evolves, updates, changes, new content releases. So we're looking at WCAG 2.2 potentially coming out shortly. And that's going to change the entire standard. That might mean that all currently compliant sites are non-compliant. And then you're going to have WCAG 3.0 come out, silver. And that might absolutely change our entire thought of what disability even is, because they've realized that they're focused too much on blindness, too much on visual problems, and not enough on mental and cognitive and intersectional disabilities like blindness and deafness, or blindness and a mental impairment. So they're taking a more holistic look at accessibility. So when those laws come out, then these sites are going to be obsolete. So that's why you need some automated system as a safety net. Nothing can replace good practices. It's a very good idea to launch these sites with as high accessibility standards as possible, but you do want to make sure you have that safety net. It's like saying, oh, I locked my door so I can leave my window open. You're not safe. You want as much safety as possible.
Thank you very much, Matt. As far as I understand, it's very difficult to recode a website, or it is realistic, and then we can just recode the whole website.
We have a solution for that. Recoding the website from scratch is a nightmare. It would take an intense amount of effort. but we have a tool for developers. It's called a scanning and monitoring solution, and it pinpoints all of the violations on a site so that they can go in and sort of surgically change that element specifically. So there are tools out there on the market that allow developers to remediate manually. And it is good for a site. There are some things that the widget cannot fix. So you need manual remediation still. Nothing will replace that. But you're looking at time. The automation happens in minutes, but getting a team of developers to sit down and read these reports and then go in and action them still takes time. And without these tools, you're looking at months and months of remediation. So it is possible, but it's just really difficult. It's a good question.
Thank you very much. I think that the questions that I'm asking are all about the universal design, and I think they're relevant not only for the digital world, but also for the physical, the real world. And today we are facing the issue like of urban spaces. For example, designers plan accessible environment and plan ramps next to staircases. So the question is, why do we need to adapt a staircase if you can build a ramp from the very beginning? Like no staircases are really needed. And I think the same story goes true for widgets. Like, why do you need to apply a widget to a website if you can create a different website from scratch? I think this is a conflict that exists in the universal design.
Yes, so the reason that the widgets are still necessary, it's also sort of the reason why, like in the 60s and 70s in America, they released new laws for ADA accessibility physically. So buildings had to have ramps, they had to have handrails, they had to have special doorknobs, you had to have handicap parking. And this was just a revolutionary idea, it was very new. And so now you're looking at the digital space, and that question is now very new here. So in 10, 20 years, these questions will be solved. Like, why do I have to build a ramp next to stairs when I could just build a ramp in the first place? Again, it's because we're using these programming languages that are old. Like all of the technology that we're building this stuff with is decades old. Now, some of the most popular platforms and programming languages are not new. And accessibility best practices are not ingrained into sort of the web-based programming education. So like there are universal sort of accessibility standards for the physical world that would also apply here in terms of aesthetics. I think that once we're able to better understand it and then standardize it, we will get to that point. I think we're still a bit away, maybe 15 years away. And then we'll look back at this time and be like, oh my God, can you believe that this ever was a problem? So hopefully it becomes that way.
I completely agree with you. Are there any comments from the audience? Okay, then I will try to sum up our discussion. I think this small discussion was about the fact that we are now at a certain stage of our development where we are aiming for universal design, for universality in what we design, but at the same time, we have quite a lot of legacy left from those who lived and worked before us, like old websites, old urban spaces, which cannot just be destroyed overnight. And we find ourselves in the situation when we need to adapt the spaces, both digital and physical. So we are still trying to combine making universal design from scratch and adapting the old design. Maybe in the future we will be making everything accessible from scratch, but this is future. We will grow there, we will evolve towards that, but for now we can't always use the principles of universal design.
Yeah, I think that a good metaphor that might be apt for Moscow is, so take Khrushchevka. You have these old buildings that were only designed to exist for 20 years, but they still exist. Now there are new building standards. What do you do with these old buildings? So you can apply these changes to Khrushchevka, Panielka, like all of these old Soviet buildings as best as you can, but it's still uh, not going to even compare to what's going to be constructed 15 years from now. So we're moving from this sort of old understanding of accessibility. So you were very right in saying that we're moving towards this more universal understanding of accessibility. So it won't be siloed into certain aspects of life, but it'll be more all-encompassing, all disabilities, all aspects of life. And I think that that would be a really interesting thing to see in the future.
Thank you, Matt. I think this is a very positive note that we can use to wrap up the second day of our conference. So this is the end of our third session. You are most welcome to join us tomorrow. Tomorrow we will have a completely online day. Matt, thank you very much for the talk. Thank you.
Спасибо, ребята.